we're changing. In Zuffenhausen, this is a car that whether people who are car guys or not car guys, they know what a 911 looks like. How do you go about changing it?
Well, the important thing is this thing of recognition. There are certain design cues which are pure 911, and we better not touch them. Things such as the silhouette, things such as the side window graphic, the face of the car, the way a 911 looks at you. Those are typical of Porsche 911 elements that we have to stick with and to work with them carefully. I told my guys with this car, don't make it retro, because in a way the 911 was never retro, it never went back at anything. It was just a slower evolution, but it was a steady evolution. Each generation actually was improved over the one before, but we never really lost that original touch of the very first generation.
How many generations are there in total?
Well, this would be the seventh.
The seventh generation in what, 40 years?
48 years, actually.
48 years.
Yeah.
Wow. How long have you been at Porsche?
Well, almost 50% of that time, actually 23 years.
So, give me an idea of a background of Matthias.
Well, imagine a boy who at the age of 2 knows all the cars on the road. At the age of 6, I started drawing cars. At the age of 9, I made my first model car out of pottery clay. I painted it orange, and the roof was red and the lamps were yellow. But
what was the car?
It was probably something like a 60s racing car, maybe like a Porsche 908.
So how did you go from making clay model cars to design?
Well, I just proceeded with my own hobby, as you could say, knowing deep inside that I would become a car designer. And the first real step was actually my dad, who actually called up Ford. We lived nearby Ford in Cologne, and arranged an interview with some of the designers. And they said, hey man, you're on the right track, keep going, go and study. That I should go to a special car design, automotive design college, such as the Royal College of Art or the Art Center in Pasadena. And the problem is they're expensive places, so I needed to find a sponsor. But by then I had so much material that I'd been doing on my own, and won a sponsorship from Audi for a master's course in London.
Wow. So you go to Royal College of Art in London.
Yeah.
You're there. Where do you go after school?
Since I had this contract with Audi due to the sponsorship, of course, I went to Ingolstadt, and I was an exterior designer there for about 2 years.
So what kind of projects did you work on there?
It was the second generation Audi A8. It was one of the many A4s. I worked on a racing car, which was interesting, like one of those Audi 90 touring cars.
So right out of design school, you're working on race cars?
Yeah.
Amazing. You had like a hell of a career.
Well, that was the start until in '88, I received a phone call from Mr. Harm, the guy. And he said, well, I just started my career at Porsche. He became chief designer at Porsche in '88. And he needed to form a new team. And we knew each other, and he liked my work, so he asked me, would you be interested in coming to Porsche?
Tough question, huh?
Tough question. I said yes. And 1st of April '89, I started to work as an exterior designer at Porsche.
So 2 years, really,
Yeah.
out of design school. You're now working at one of the most iconic car companies in the world.
True.
Unbelievable. So what were you doing between 1989 and say now at Porsche?
There were really zillions of projects, some of which saw the light of day and others that didn't. I worked on a lot of the known exterior projects, but also I worked on one interior project, which was the production Boxster.
You're now working on a very iconic product. Where do you get the inspiration?
To be honest, I'm a car nut through and through. So my inspiration does not come from nature or from products or architecture. It actually comes from cars. And cars have played such an important role in my whole life because there always were some a way of sort of dreaming into a bright future. Like I saw a fantastic exotic classic car parked on the roadside, and I thought, yes, one day I want to own one of these cars. And I was sure at the same time that as an owner of a car like this, I'd be a highly educated, busy man.
Yeah.
And a car really could bring that across back then. The funny thing is that all I want to do is own some of the cars that I was dreaming about as a teenager.
And what were those?
Well, they were mainly V8 powered, leaf-sprung cars with 2+2 or 4 seats.
Yeah.
Either into the sort of muscle car type of car, like a 66 Mustang Fastback.
Understandable.
One of the
Good
cars I
choice,
owned.
yeah.
Also a design icon, really.
Very much so.
And then on the other hand, the more exotic sort of European type of car, like you've seen in Lamborghini, Maserati, and that sort of stuff.
So where do you draw your inspirations from, either your collection or your love of cars, into this car today?
I guess I recognize the purity in design. Some of the cars I own because I like the design, because they are icons by themselves. With the 911, I always want to look forward. I would like to create a car that in 20 years' time someone looks back and say, hey, do you remember the 991? Wasn't that a modern car for its day? So the inspiration comes from all the time being busy with cars, deciding what I like, what I'm getting tired of. And I think you can see that in the purity of some of the details, because purity is something you don't get tired of so quickly.
So how do you go from the code name 997 to 991?
Oh, that's a funny story. Everybody would have believed that this generation would be called 998. Now, our back then R&D chief Wolfgang Dörheimer saw that problem, and he said, if we start to develop this car now, and developing means talking to suppliers, each part number of each project starts with a project number, which would have been 998. And he said, any idiot can really see that we're working on the next generation. So we call it 991.
From all this tradition, your background, and the inspiration you had with classics, what have you done here?
Well, you've got to look at the proportions first. We had the biggest increase in wheelbase ever in the history of the 911. So we're talking 100 millimeters increase in wheelbase. We gave it 20-inch wheels instead of 19, and that altogether really changes the attitude of the car.
Huge difference in the look.
Suddenly it's getting slim. We lowered the car. And the side glass, the proportion of the side glass, I think it's something like 2 inches that it's lower than before. So it suddenly get this sort of typical
that is very noticeable.
supercars look. And I think it really helps the Carrera to look as fast as it goes.
Overall, the car looks a little bit more exotic to me. It looks wider and lower, a little bit more muscular.
One of the things was we have these very sharp crease lines which run from the A-post all the way to the rear, the shapes being lost in the rear spoiler. And then we have a second crease line, which is a novelty for a Porsche 911. We've got a crease line in the rear, also a bit like an aerodynamic device, but what it does is it ties the taillamps together. And that makes for this very modern look from the rear.
And what about the interior? Notice it's a more familial look now. It's tied a little bit to the Panamera, the Cayenne.
Well, it does, because as with the exterior, there's something in the interior that we call the design DNA. What makes this car look a lot more like the new generation of other Porsches is the raised center console, which of course is not a carryover part. It's brand new for the 911. It's much narrower and much more puristic.
I can't help but notice there's a big sunroof now. It doesn't have this little sunroof in the front. It's almost the entire roof, which is what the Targa used to be. Sure, we're going to have another Targa.
Well, first of all, we increased the size of the sunroof because it was possible, because we wanted to make it a broader size sunroof. Secondly, all the variants that you know of the 997 will one by one appear on the market.